She's just the wife who keeps his schedule straight and his coffee hot, Vanessa Sterling announced to the board members at the charity auction, her perfectly manicured hand dismissively waving toward me. The group of tech executives chuckled politely, while I stood frozen, holding a glass of champagne that suddenly felt too heavy. What Vanessa didn't know was that the merger proposal she'd been bragging about presenting next week had been written entirely by me, and by Monday morning, she'd be calling me ma'am.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tell us a duh.
The Renaissance Hotel ballroom glittered with Chicago's tech elite, all gathered for the Children's Education Foundation auction. I adjusted my emerald earrings as Marcus called me over to meet the Meridian Technologies board members. "This is my wife, Olivia," Marcus said with polite introduction tone reserved for spouses at business events. "She keeps me organized." Vanessa Sterling, his executive assistant for 3 years, stepped forward with her trademark smile. At 28, she commanded attention with her red hair in a perfect chignon and sharp intelligence that had once impressed me. "Oh, Marcus is being modest," Vanessa laughed for the entire circle to hear. "Olivia is absolutely essential. She's just the wife who keeps his schedule straight and his coffee hot. Where would any of us be without our support systems?" The comment landed like a disguised slap. Board member James Patterson chuckled, raising his whiskey. "The foundation of every successful man, a devoted wife who handles the details." Heat flooded my cheeks as polite laughter rippled through the group. These were people whose emails I'd answered, whose reports I'd ghostwritten, whose strategies I'd crafted during countless late nights while Marcus attended networking events. "She's also excellent at party planning," Vanessa continued, clearly enjoying her role. "Really knows how to make things comfortable for everyone." My wedding ring felt tight as I forced a smile. This wasn't the first time I'd been reduced to domestic functions, but something about tonight felt different. Final. "Well, we should all be so fortunate," said another voice, a woman who knows her place in the world. Her place? Apparently mine was heating Marcus's dinner and organizing social events, not analyzing market trends or developing the expansion strategies that had saved Meridian Technologies millions. Not the woman who'd single-handedly developed the merger framework Vanessa would present as Marcus's vision next week. "I think I need some air," I murmured, slipping away toward the bar. That's when I felt a presence beside me. "Enjoying the festivities?" Catherine Morrison's voice was quiet, conspiratorial. "It's been enlightening," I replied carefully. Catherine studied my face with boardroom intensity. "I've been meaning to discuss the Patterson Industries merger proposal with you. The board was particularly impressed with the cultural integration analysis." My heart stopped. The Patterson proposal, the one I'd researched and written during 3 sleepless weeks while Vanessa scheduled meetings and Marcus played golf with clients. "Your projection models were remarkably sophisticated. We rarely see that level of strategic insight. The board specifically noted the innovation in your market penetration strategies." She knew. Somehow, this CEO knew exactly who had crafted that proposal. "There's something else," Catherine said, lowering her voice. "We've been discussing organizational restructuring, new leadership positions. The board believes fresh perspective is exactly what we need." She pressed a business card into my palm. "Call me Monday morning at 8. We have much to discuss about your future at Meridian." Catherine walked away, leaving me holding a piece of cardstock that felt heavier than platinum. I spent the rest of the evening watching Marcus and Vanessa network, both completely oblivious to the conversation that had just altered everything. The taxi ride home felt surreal. Marcus chatted excitedly about his board conversations, the alcohol making him generous. "You were perfect tonight," he said, patting my knee condescendingly. "Great to have you there for support. Vanessa mentioned how much everyone appreciated your quiet presence." My quiet presence. Catherine Morrison's business card burned in my palm, hidden beneath my clutch like contraband evidence. That night, I lay awake, listening to Marcus's satisfied snoring, Catherine's card hidden in my jewelry box. For 8 years, I'd watched my MBA gather dust while crafting presentations that carried Marcus's name, strategies that built his reputation, analyses that advanced his career while erasing my professional identity. It hadn't always been this way. When we met at Northwestern's alumni mixer, we were both ambitious marketing professionals with complementary skills. He had charisma, I had analytical depth. We'd planned to build something together. Think of it as strategic investment, Marcus had said when I'd hesitated about leaving Sterling Communications. You help me reach senior management, then we'll launch our own practice. Partnership, not sacrifice. The plan made sense. Marcus excelled at client relationships, but his strategic thinking was surface level. I possessed the analytical mind that could identify patterns others missed, synthesize complex information into actionable strategies. Our first collaboration was a telecommunications market analysis. Marcus handled client meetings while I developed competitive landscape assessment, identified untapped market segments, and created penetration strategy that increased market share by 15%. When the division head praised Marcus for his visionary insights, we celebrated with champagne. "We make an incredible team," Marcus had said. "This is just the beginning." Team. The word had meant something different then. Requests started small. Could I review this proposal, polish the language? Then they expanded. I need complete competitive analysis by Thursday. Eventually, they became expectations. Marcus would arrive home with project folders, dropping them on my desk like homework assignments. Initially, I didn't mind. Watching my strategies succeed felt like winning by proxy. When Marcus got promoted, I felt proud. When clients requested his expertise, I felt accomplished. When the board praised his innovation, I felt validated. The Patterson Industries opportunity changed everything. Meridian wanted to acquire a manufacturing company, but previous attempts had failed due to cultural integration challenges. Marcus came home practically vibrating with excitement. "This could put me in the C-suite," he'd said, "but their requirements are insane. Complete cultural assessment, integration timelines, financial projections, accounting for operational disruption." I spent 5 weeks researching Patterson's corporate culture, interviewing former employees through LinkedIn, analyzing successful acquisition models. My dining room disappeared beneath organizational charts, employee surveys, integration timelines, accounting for everything from management resistance to union negotiations. The night before Marcus's presentation, I handed him 80 pages of comprehensive acquisition strategy, cultural mapping, stakeholder analysis, risk mitigation frameworks, everything cross-referenced and color-coded. "This is extraordinary," he'd said. "You've thought of everything." But when the newsletter featured Marcus's innovative acquisition approach, my name appeared nowhere. When Patterson's CEO thanked Marcus for cultural sensitivity insights, I was organizing our office. When Vanessa began referring to their strategic framework, I was researching Marcus's next project. That's when I noticed the pronouns. My analysis identified integration challenges, Marcus would tell colleagues. When Vanessa scheduled meetings to discuss Marcus's innovations, she never suggested including the person who developed them. But Catherine Morrison's business card suggested someone had been watching more carefully, someone who understood the difference between presenting ideas and creating them. Monday morning was hours away, and for the first time in 8 years, I wasn't planning to ask permission to use my own expertise. Sunday morning arrived crisp and clear. Marcus left for golf, reminding me that Vanessa would stop by at noon for the final Patterson presentation materials. "Make sure she gets everything," he called. "The board meeting is Tuesday morning." I walked to my home office, the converted guest bedroom where I'd built Marcus's career from shadows. File cabinets lined the walls, filled with research, strategies, and analyses that had shaped Meridian's most successful initiatives over 8 years. At 11:45, Vanessa's silver Audi pulled into our driveway. Even on Sunday, she looked boardroom ready. Tailored blazer, designer handbag, confidence radiating from every movement. "Good morning, Olivia," she said, extending a Starbucks cup. "I brought you a latte." Marcus mentioned you're always so helpful with organizing materials.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I accepted the coffee, noting how she positioned herself as the thoughtful professional bringing treats to the helpful housewife. In my workspace, she surveyed the organized documents with approving nods. "This looks comprehensive," she said, flipping through cultural assessment sections. "Marcus really outdid himself. The depth of analysis is impressive." I watched her examine research I'd conducted through dozens of employee interviews, market analysis from databases Marcus didn't know existed, integration strategies developed by studying 12 similar acquisitions. "He worked very hard on this," I replied carefully. "We both did," Vanessa corrected, settling across from my desk. "The cultural sensitivity aspects were particularly challenging. Marcus and I spent hours discussing manufacturing versus tech corporate environments. Hours discussing nuances I'd identified through weeks of research. I listened to her explain how they had developed frameworks I'd created alone at this desk. "You know, Olivia," she continued confidentially, "I hope you realize how valuable your support has been. Managing his personal life so efficiently allows us to focus entirely on strategic initiatives." Us. The word hit like a gentle slap. Vanessa had inserted herself into Marcus's professional identity so seamlessly that she genuinely believed she was his intellectual partner. "The Patterson deal could really change Marcus's career trajectory," she continued, organizing documents. "And honestly, for mine too. The board has been noticing our strategic partnership." Our strategic partnership. I watched this accomplished woman, Northwestern MBA, former McKinsey consultant, legitimately intelligent, unknowingly steal credit for my work while praising the man who'd been stealing it for years. "Do you ever think about returning to work?" Vanessa asked. "I know Marcus appreciates having you manage things at home, but you have an MBA from Northwestern. That's impressive." The question revealed everything about how she saw me. A smart woman who'd chosen domestic life over professional ambition. Someone whose education was interesting biographical detail rather than active intellectual capital. "The market is really competitive, though," she continued. "Clients expect demonstrated experience, proven track records. It's not like 8 years ago when consulting opportunities were more accessible." She was gently discouraging me from pursuing professional work, probably without realizing it. She couldn't conceive that I'd been conducting sophisticated strategic analysis continuously, just without credit. "If you ever want to explore opportunities, I'd be happy to provide guidance," she offered magnanimously. "Marcus and I have excellent connections. We could probably identify some entry-level positions." Entry-level positions? For the woman who developed the strategic framework she was about to present to Meridian's board. After she left, I sat surrounded by empty folders and her expensive perfume. Catherine Morrison's business card lay in my drawer, waiting. In 18 hours, I would either remain Marcus's invisible resource and Vanessa's unknowing benefactor, or I would reclaim the voice I'd been lending to others for nearly a decade. Vanessa thought she knew who I was, just the wife who kept Marcus organized. Tomorrow morning, she'd learn that the woman she'd been patronizing was about to become the person she'd be reporting to. Monday morning arrived with coffee that tasted like anticipation. At exactly 7:55 a.m., I dialed Catherine Morrison's direct line, my hands steadier than they'd been in years. "Olivia," Catherine's voice carried warmth mixed with business efficiency, "I was hoping you'd call. Can you be here in an hour? I'd like you to meet with our strategic planning committee before the Patterson presentation this afternoon." Strategic Planning Committee. The same group that would be evaluating the proposal I'd written, presented by Marcus and Vanessa as their collaborative masterpiece. "I'll be there," I said, already reaching for the navy blazer I hadn't worn since my last job interview 8 years ago. The Meridian Technologies building rose 37 floors above Chicago's financial district, its glass facade reflecting the morning sun like a beacon. I'd visited exactly twice in 8 years, both times for company holiday parties where I'd been introduced as Marcus's supportive wife. Today, I walked through the marble lobby as something different entirely. Catherine met me personally at the 28th floor elevator bank, her silver hair perfectly styled and her handshake firm enough to convey serious intent. "Before we join the committee," she said, guiding me toward her corner office, "I want to show you something." Her desk held two documents side by side. One was labeled Patterson Industries Acquisition Strategy, Marcus Chen and Vanessa Sterling. The other bore my name, Cultural Integration Framework, Olivia Chen. "We've been tracking submission metadata for all strategic proposals," Catherine explained, settling behind her desk. "Your document was uploaded to our shared server 3 weeks ago through Marcus's access credentials, but the original creation date shows it was drafted on your personal computer." My breath caught. "You've been monitoring document origins?" "For 6 months. We noticed inconsistencies in writing styles, analytical depth, and strategic sophistication across various submissions. Some proposals showed graduate-level strategic thinking, while others from the same contributors were surprisingly surface-level." She opened the first document, Marcus's version. Basic bullet points, generic recommendations, strategies that could have been copied from any business textbook. Then she opened mine, detailed cultural assessments, sophisticated integration timelines, innovative risk mitigation frameworks that accounted for variables most consultants never considered. "The difference is remarkable," Catherine continued. "One reads like a first-year MBA project. The other demonstrates the kind of strategic insight we pay consultants $200,000 to provide." "What does this mean?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "It means we've identified the actual source of some of our most successful strategic initiatives over the past 3 years. The telecommunications expansion that increased market share by 18%? Your work. The supply chain optimization that saved us $2.3 million? Also yours. The European partnership framework that Vanessa presented as her innovation last quarter, traced back to your computer." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Catherine had been conducting a forensic investigation into intellectual theft, and I'd been the unknowing victim being systematically tracked and documented. "How long have you known?" I asked. "We suspected for 8 months, confirmed it 6 weeks ago when we installed advanced document tracking software." Catherine leaned forward. "Olivia, you've been ghostwriting approximately 70% of Marcus's strategic output. Vanessa has been presenting your frameworks as collaborative efforts with Marcus, but she's never contributed original strategic content." 70%? The number hit like a physical blow. Nearly 3/4 of Marcus's professional reputation had been built on my intellectual labor, while Vanessa had advanced her career by taking credit for strategies she'd never developed. "The board has been discussing this situation extensively," Catherine continued. "We're not just dealing with misattribution, we're looking at systematic intellectual property theft that's affected promotion decisions, salary adjustments, and strategic planning for years." She opened a third folder containing organizational charts and compensation analyses. "Marcus received a 40% salary increase last year based on strategic contributions you actually made. Vanessa was promoted to senior executive assistant with a $60,000 raise for presenting frameworks you developed. Meanwhile, you've received no recognition, no compensation, and no career advancement for work that's generated millions in revenue." The scope was staggering. This wasn't just about one stolen proposal or missed acknowledgement. This was systematic economic exploitation disguised as marital support and professional collaboration. "What happens now?" I asked. "That depends on what you want to happen," Catherine replied. "We can handle this internally, restructure assignments, clarify attribution, ensure proper credit moving forward, or we can address it more comprehensively." Catherine's smile was sharp as winter sunlight. "Marcus and Vanessa are presenting your Patterson proposal to the board at 2 o'clock this afternoon. They're expecting praise for strategic innovation they didn't create. Instead, they're going to face questions about authorship, originality, and professional ethics that they won't be able to answer." She handed me a manila envelope marked Confidential Board Review. Inside, you'll find our complete analysis of document origins, writing pattern assessments, and strategic contribution breakdowns for the past 3 years. The board wants to meet with you immediately following Marcus and Vanessa's presentation. To discuss what? Your future at Meridian Technologies. We're launching a new strategic innovation division focused on acquisition assessment and cultural integration. The position requires someone with demonstrated expertise in cross-sector analysis and proven ability to identify integration challenges other consultants miss. The job description was basically a catalog of everything I'd been doing invisibly for Marcus, everything Vanessa thought she'd been collaborating on, everything that had built their careers while erasing mine. The salary range is $140 to $180, plus equity participation and performance bonuses, Catherine continued. You'd be reporting directly to me with a team of 6 analysts and complete autonomy over strategic methodology. $140,000, more than Marcus currently made, more than Vanessa would probably earn in 5 years, for work I'd already been doing without any compensation beyond the privilege of remaining married and keeping Marcus's domestic life organized. There's one more thing, Catherine said, her expression growing more serious. This position would make you Marcus's direct supervisor, and Vanessa would be reassigned to your department as a junior analyst, reporting to your team lead. The implications crystallized with perfect clarity. The woman who dismissed me as just the wife at Saturday night's charity auction would be working under my authority by Wednesday morning. The man who'd built his career on my intellectual labor would be answering to the woman he'd spent 8 years treating as his unpaid research assistant. When do you need an answer? I asked. I need to know if you're interested before the 2 o'clock presentation. If you say yes, the board will be asking Marcus and Vanessa some very pointed questions about their collaborative process this afternoon. I looked at the envelope in my hands, heavy with documentation of 8 years' worth of stolen expertise, misattributed innovation, and systematic invisibility. Outside Catherine's floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago stretched endlessly toward the horizon, full of possibilities I'd forgotten existed. I'm interested, I said. Excellent. The presentation is in Conference Room A. I suggest you observe from the adjoining viewing room. You'll want to see their faces when they realize the person they've been exploiting is about to become their boss. At 1:45 p.m., I positioned myself in the viewing room adjacent to Conference Room A, watching through one-way glass as the board members filed in. 12 executives in tailored suits, carrying tablets and coffee cups, settling around the mahogany table where my professional fate would be decided. Marcus arrived precisely at 1:55, his confident stride unchanged for 8 years of successful presentations built on my research. He wore his lucky navy tie, the one I'd given him for our 3rd anniversary, back when I'd still believed we were building something together. Behind him, Vanessa carried the leather portfolio I'd watched her organize yesterday, her red hair pulled back in the same perfect chignon she wore to every important meeting. They looked like the picture of professional collaboration. Marcus with his easy charm and executive presence, Vanessa with her sharp intelligence and polished competence. No one in that room would suspect that the most sophisticated strategic thinking they were about to hear had emerged from a converted guest bedroom in Lincoln Park. Catherine entered at exactly 2 o'clock, taking her seat at the head of the table with the quiet authority that had built her reputation. Good afternoon, everyone. Marcus, Vanessa, please proceed with your Patterson Industries assessment. Marcus stood first, his presentation smile perfectly calibrated for board-level audiences. Thank you, Catherine. Vanessa and I are excited to share our strategic framework for the Patterson acquisition. This represents months of collaborative analysis and innovative thinking about cultural integration challenges. Months of collaborative analysis. I'd started the Patterson research on September 15th, working alone at my desk while Marcus attended a client golf tournament in Phoenix. Vanessa had been scheduling his meetings and managing his calendar, completely unaware that the strategic foundation for his career advancement was being laid 40 miles away in our dining room. The key insight, Marcus continued, clicking to the first slide, is that previous acquisition attempts failed not due to financial considerations, but because of fundamental cultural incompatibilities between tech and manufacturing environments. My insight. The breakthrough I developed after interviewing 17 former Patterson employees through LinkedIn connections, analyzing exit interview data I'd requested through Freedom of Information Act filings, and cross-referencing cultural assessment surveys with integration success rates from 12 similar acquisitions. Vanessa stood to join him, seamlessly taking over the presentation flow they'd practiced. Our framework addresses these challenges through a phased integration process that respects existing management structures while gradually implementing Meridian's operational standards. Our framework, the integration timeline I developed by studying successful acquisitions at General Electric, analyzing case studies from Harvard Business Review, and creating original models that accounted for everything from union negotiations to middle management resistance patterns. The financial projections are particularly encouraging, Marcus continued, displaying charts I'd created using advanced modeling software I'd taught myself during late-night research sessions. We're projecting 18-month ROI with minimal operational disruption. Board member James Patterson leaned forward, studying the documentation with obvious interest. The cultural sensitivity protocols are impressive. How did you identify the specific integration challenges? Marcus and Vanessa exchanged a quick glance, the kind of practiced coordination that suggested they'd anticipated this question and prepared their response. Extensive fieldwork, Vanessa replied smoothly. We conducted interviews with current and former Patterson employees, analyzed organizational behavior patterns, and cross-referenced our findings with industry best practices. We conducted interviews. I'd made 47 phone calls over 3 weeks, presenting myself as a graduate student researching manufacturing sector employment satisfaction. I'd compiled a database of insights that revealed exactly why previous acquisition attempts had failed and what approaches might succeed. The risk mitigation strategies are particularly sophisticated, added Dr. Sarah Williams, flipping through the printed materials. These contingency plans account for variables most consultants never consider. Variables I'd identified by studying failed acquisitions in the automotive, aerospace, and electronics manufacturing sectors. Contingency plans I'd developed by modeling scenarios that ranged from regulatory challenges to employee retention crises. We're particularly proud of the stakeholder analysis section, Marcus said, his confidence building as the board's interest became apparent. Identifying key influence networks within Patterson's management structure was crucial for developing our integration approach. Stakeholder analysis I'd completed using organizational charts I'd requested from Patterson's Human Resources Department, cross-referenced with LinkedIn network mapping, and internal communication patterns I'd inferred from public social media interactions. Catherine had remained silent during the presentation, taking notes with the methodical precision she brought to all strategic discussions. Now she looked up from her tablet, her expression carefully neutral. "The work is certainly comprehensive," she said. "I'm curious about your collaborative process. How did you divide the research responsibilities?" Another practiced glance between Marcus and Vanessa. This was the question that could expose the fundamental lie underlying their entire professional partnership. "We played to our individual strengths," Marcus replied. "I handled the high-level strategic framework while Vanessa managed the detailed analysis and data compilation." High-level strategic framework, the conceptual foundation I developed during the first week of research before diving into the detailed analysis he was attributing to Vanessa. "The cultural assessment interviews were my primary responsibility," Vanessa added. "Understanding employee perspectives and management dynamics required extensive one-on-one conversations. The interviews I'd conducted, transcribed, and analyzed while she'd been scheduling Marcus's calendar and coordinating his travel arrangements." "Interesting," Catherine said, making another note. "And the financial modeling, those projections show sophisticated understanding of manufacturing sector economics." "That was collaborative," Marcus said quickly. "We both contributed to the economic analysis." Collaborative. The financial models I'd built using industry data I'd purchased with my own credit card, software I'd learned through online tutorials, and projection methodologies I'd adapted from my graduate school coursework. Catherine closed her tablet and looked directly at Marcus and Vanessa. "Thank you both. This is certainly impressive work. The board will need to deliberate privately before making our acquisition decision." As Marcus and Vanessa gathered their materials, neither seemed aware that they'd just presented 8 weeks of my intellectual labor as their collaborative achievement to a board that had been tracking document origins for 6 months. "One final question," Catherine said as they reached the door. "Are you both comfortable standing behind every aspect of this analysis? The research methodology, the data sources, the strategic recommendations?" "Absolutely," Marcus replied without hesitation. "Completely confident in our work," Vanessa agreed. They walked out of Conference Room A with the satisfied expressions of professionals who'd successfully presented innovative strategies they genuinely believed they'd developed together. Neither understood that the woman they'd dismissed as just the wife had been watching from behind one-way glass, holding documentation that would unravel their careers within the hour. The board members remained seated as Catherine locked the conference room door. In 60 seconds, I would walk through that door and claim credit for every strategic insight Marcus and Vanessa had just presented as their own collaborative masterpiece. The moment I'd been unconsciously building toward for 8 years was finally here. The invisible architect of their success was about to step into the light, and the people who'd been taking credit for my work were about to discover that intellectual theft had consequences they'd never imagined. Catherine opened the conference room door and nodded toward me. "Board members, I'd like you to meet Olivia Chen, the actual author of the strategic framework you just heard." The silence that followed was profound. 12 executives turned to stare at me as I entered the room where Marcus and Vanessa had just finished presenting my work as their collaborative achievement. Dr. Sarah Williams looked confused. James Patterson appeared intrigued, and Robert Kane from finance seemed to be processing information that contradicted everything he thought he knew about strategic development at Meridian. "Please, have a seat," Catherine said, gesturing toward the chair at the opposite end of the table from where she sat. "Olivia, would you mind walking the board through your actual research process for the Patterson analysis?" I opened the folder I'd been carrying, my folder, containing the original documents, research notes, interview transcripts, and analytical frameworks that Marcus and Vanessa had just claimed as their own work. "I began the Patterson Industries research on September 15th, I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. Marcus had mentioned that Meridian was interested in acquisition opportunities in the manufacturing sector, but he hadn't yet developed any specific strategic approach. Board member Patricia Hendricks leaned forward. "You conducted this research independently?" "Completely independently. Marcus was attending a client golf tournament in Phoenix that week. I started by analyzing why previous acquisition attempts had failed, which required researching Patterson's corporate culture, management structure, and employee satisfaction patterns. I opened my laptop and connected it to the conference room's display system. The screen filled with my original research timeline, dates, methodologies, source documentation, everything Marcus and Vanessa had glossed over in their presentation. "The cultural assessment interviews took 3 weeks," I continued. "I contacted 47 current and former Patterson employees, presenting myself as a graduate student researching manufacturing sector employment satisfaction. Each conversation was recorded, transcribed, and analyzed for patterns related to management communication styles, operational decision-making processes, and resistance to organizational change. These interviews," Dr. Williams said, studying the documentation I distributed, "they're remarkably comprehensive. The insights into middle management dynamics are particularly sophisticated." "Thank you." The key breakthrough came during week 4 of the research, when I identified that previous acquisition failures weren't due to financial or operational incompatibilities, but to fundamental differences in communication culture between tech and manufacturing environments. James Patterson was taking notes rapidly. "The integration timeline you developed, that Marcus and Vanessa presented, accounts for variables I've never seen other consultants consider." "The timeline required modeling 12 different integration scenarios," I explained, clicking to the next slide. "I analyzed successful acquisitions at General Electric, Siemens, and Boeing to identify common factors in smooth cultural integration. Then I created original frameworks that addressed specific challenges unique to Patterson's organizational structure." "The financial projections," Robert Kane interrupted, "those models show sophisticated understanding of manufacturing economics. Did Marcus or Vanessa contribute to that analysis?" No, I developed the financial models independently, using industry data I purchased through my personal Bloomberg terminal access. The projection methodologies were adapted from coursework I completed during my MBA program at Northwestern. Catherine had remained silent during my explanation, but now she opened her tablet and displayed a different document on the conference room screen. Board members, what you're seeing is our metadata analysis for strategic proposals submitted over the past 3 years. The blue markers indicate documents with sophisticated analytical frameworks. The red markers show surface-level presentations. The pattern was unmistakable. Blue markers consistently correlated with proposals that had originated from my computer, while red markers aligned with work that Marcus and Vanessa had actually developed independently. The telecommunications expansion strategy from last year, Catherine continued, generated 18% market share growth. Metadata shows it was created entirely by Olivia, then uploaded through Marcus's credentials. The European partnership framework that Vanessa presented as her innovation last quarter also traced to Olivia's computer. Patricia Hendricks was studying the data with obvious concern. How long has this attribution discrepancy been occurring? Approximately 3 years, Catherine replied, since Vanessa began working as Marcus's executive assistant. The pattern suggests systematic misattribution of intellectual property, with Marcus receiving credit for strategic frameworks he didn't develop, and Vanessa advancing her career by presenting Olivia's work as collaborative efforts. This is a serious issue, James Patterson said quietly. We're not just talking about misattribution. This affects promotion decisions, salary adjustments, and strategic planning accuracy. I watched the board members process the implications. Marcus had received multiple raises and promotions based on strategic contributions I'd actually made. Vanessa had been promoted to senior executive assistant for presenting frameworks she'd never developed. Meanwhile, I'd received no recognition, no compensation, and no career advancement for work that had generated millions in revenue for Meridian.
What's the scope of this issue? Dr. Williams asked. Catherine clicked to another slide showing financial analysis. Olivia has ghostwritten approximately 70% of Marcus's strategic output over the past 3 years. Strategies attributed to Marcus and Vanessa have generated over $12 million in additional revenue for Meridian. Olivia has received zero compensation for this intellectual contribution. 70%? $12 million? The numbers provided stark quantification for years of invisible labor and systematic exploitation. The Patterson proposal they just presented, I said, represents 8 weeks of full-time research and analysis. Marcus provided me with 3 bullet points and asked me to flesh out the details. Vanessa was unaware that any research was being conducted until I'd completed the entire framework. So, when Marcus said they played to their individual strengths, Robert Kane observed, he meant you conducted all research while he and Vanessa handled presentation logistics. Essentially, yes. Marcus focuses on client relationships and board presentations. Vanessa manages his schedule and coordinates his professional commitments. I develop the strategic content that makes their presentations successful. This creates several serious problems, Patricia Hendricks said, looking around the table at her fellow board members. First, we've been making strategic decisions based on misattributed expertise. Second, we've been compensating the wrong people for intellectual contributions. Third, we're potentially losing access to our actual strategic resource. Catherine nodded, which brings us to why Olivia is here today. The board has been discussing organizational restructuring to address these attribution issues and ensure we retain access to the strategic capabilities we've been benefiting from. What kind of restructuring? Dr. Williams asked. We're launching a strategic innovation division focused on acquisition assessment and cultural integration. The position requires demonstrated expertise in cross-sector analysis and proven ability to identify integration challenges other consultants miss. Catherine was describing a job that perfectly matched everything I'd been doing invisibly for Marcus, everything Vanessa believed she'd been collaborating on, everything that had built their careers while erasing mine.
The salary range is 140 to 180,000, plus equity participation and performance bonuses, Catherine continued. Direct reporting to me, team of 6 analysts, complete autonomy over strategic methodology. The compensation was more than Marcus currently earned, more than Vanessa would probably make in 5 years, for work I'd already proven I could deliver at the highest level. There's one additional consideration, Catherine said, her expression growing more serious. This restructuring would require reassigning Marcus to regional account management and transferring Vanessa to the Strategic Innovation Division as a junior analyst. The implications crystallized perfectly. The woman who dismissed me as just the wife at Saturday's charity auction would be working under my supervision by Wednesday morning. The man who'd built his career on my intellectual labor would be reporting to people I'd be working alongside as equals. The board needs to vote on this restructuring proposal, Catherine announced, all in favor of establishing the Strategic Innovation Division with Olivia Chen as director. 12 hands rose simultaneously. Motion carried unanimously. Olivia, congratulations. You start tomorrow morning. I looked around the table at faces that had been politely dismissive just days before. These same executives who'd chuckled at Vanessa's description of me as Marcus's domestic support system had just voted to make me their strategic development director based on work I'd been doing in secret for years. There's one more thing, Catherine said, with a smile that suggested she'd been looking forward to this moment. Marcus and Vanessa are waiting in my office for feedback on their presentation. Would you like to personally inform them about the new organizational structure? The woman they'd spent years treating as invisible was about to walk into Catherine's office and announce that she was now their supervisor. The person they'd dismissed as just the wife was about to become the most important strategic voice in their professional lives. 8 years of silence were about to end in the most satisfying way imaginable. Catherine's office felt different as I entered behind her, more spacious, more authoritative, more like a place where I belonged rather than a destination I was visiting. Marcus and Vanessa sat in the leather chairs facing her desk, their body language radiating the confidence of professionals who'd just delivered a successful presentation. How did the board respond? Marcus asked immediately, his executive smile already forming in anticipation of praise. They were very interested in the strategic framework, Catherine replied, settling behind her desk while I remained standing near the door. In fact, they had several detailed questions about the research methodology and analytical process. We're happy to provide additional documentation, Vanessa offered, opening her portfolio. Marcus and I maintained comprehensive records of our collaborative process. That won't be necessary, Catherine said. The board has all the documentation they need to make their decision about the Patterson acquisition. Marcus leaned forward slightly. And the feedback on our strategic approach? The strategic approach was exceptional, Catherine replied. The cultural integration protocols were particularly sophisticated. The board was impressed by the depth of analysis and innovative thinking. I could see Marcus processing this praise, already mentally drafting the update email he'd send to his network about the successful board presentation. Vanessa was making notes in her planner, probably scheduling follow-up meetings and client calls based on their anticipated success. However, Catherine continued, her tone shifting almost imperceptibly, there were some questions about attribution and collaborative responsibilities. The word attribution landed like a small stone dropped into still water. Marcus's confident expression flickered slightly, while Vanessa looked up from her planner with the first hint of uncertainty I'd seen from her. The word attribution landed like a small stone dropped into still water. Marcus's confident expression flickered slightly, while Vanessa looked up from her planner with the first hint of uncertainty I'd seen from her. What kind of questions? Marcus asked. The board was curious about how you divided the research responsibilities. Specifically, who conducted the employee interviews, who developed the financial models, and who created the integration timeline. Another practiced glance between Marcus and Vanessa. They'd clearly rehearsed responses to questions about their collaborative process, but something in Catherine's tone was making them reconsider their prepared answers. As I mentioned during the presentation, Marcus replied carefully, we played to our individual strengths. I handled the strategic framework while Vanessa managed the detailed analysis. The detailed analysis, Catherine repeated. That would include the 47 employee interviews, the comparative acquisition studies, and the manufacturing sector economic modeling? Vanessa nodded. The cultural assessment required extensive one-on-one conversations with current and former Patterson employees. I spent weeks conducting interviews and analyzing organizational behavior patterns. Weeks conducting interviews? I'd made those phone calls from my home office, while Vanessa had been scheduling Marcus's meetings and coordinating his travel arrangements. She had no idea that the insights she was claiming as her own had emerged from conversations I'd conducted alone. Interesting, Catherine said, opening a folder on her desk, because we have documentation that suggests a different collaborative process. She placed two documents side by side on her desk, the same comparison she'd shown me earlier, Marcus and Vanessa's basic proposal next to my comprehensive strategic framework. These are two versions of the Patterson analysis, Catherine explained. One was uploaded through Marcus's credentials and shows collaborative authorship between you and Vanessa. The other was created entirely by a single contributor using advanced analytical methodologies and original research. Marcus was studying the documents with growing confusion. I don't understand. We only submitted one proposal. That's correct. You submitted one proposal, but our metadata analysis shows that someone else created a far more sophisticated version of the same strategic framework. Someone who actually conducted the employee interviews, developed the financial models, and created the integration timelines you both presented as your collaborative work. The silence that followed was profound. I watched Marcus and Vanessa process information that contradicted everything they believed about their professional partnership and the source of their strategic success. Who created the other version? Vanessa asked quietly. Catherine looked at me and nodded. Olivia, would you mind joining us? I stepped forward from where I'd been standing near the door, moving to the chair beside Marcus and Vanessa. For the first time in 8 years, I was sitting at the same table as my husband in a professional context, not as his supportive spouse, but as his intellectual equal. Olivia created the comprehensive strategic framework you just presented. She conducted all 47 employee interviews, developed the financial models, created the integration timelines, and identified the cultural compatibility challenges that form the foundation of your proposal. Marcus turned to stare at me with an expression I'd never seen before, complete bewilderment mixed with something approaching panic. That's impossible. Olivia doesn't work for Meridian. No, she doesn't work for Meridian, Catherine agreed. She's been conducting advanced strategic analysis as an unpaid contractor, with her work being submitted through your credentials and presented as collaborative efforts between you and Vanessa. But the research, Vanessa stammered, the interviews, the data analysis, I thought Marcus and I developed those frameworks together. You developed presentation logistics together, Catherine corrected. Olivia developed the strategic content that made your presentation successful. For the past 3 years, approximately 70% of the strategic insights attributed to your partnership have actually originated from Olivia's independent research. 70%. I watched that number hit them like a physical blow. Marcus's confident executive posture crumbled as he realized that the majority of his professional reputation had been built on my intellectual labor. Vanessa's face went pale as she understood that her career advancement had been based on presenting strategies she'd never actually developed. The board finds this attribution discrepancy deeply concerning. Not only have strategic contributions been systematically misattributed, but promotion and compensation decisions have been based on incorrect assessments of individual capabilities. Marcus was looking at me with an expression that mixed hurt, betrayal, and dawning recognition. You've been working behind my back, submitting competing proposals? I've been working behind your back for 8 years, I replied quietly. Every presentation you've delivered, every strategic insight you've shared, every innovative solution you've proposed. I researched, analyzed, and developed them while you attended networking events and client dinners. But we're married, he said, as if that explained everything. Your work supports our family. That's partnership. Partnership implies shared credit and mutual recognition, I said. For 8 years, I've been your unpaid intellectual resource while you've built a career on my expertise. Vanessa has been advancing her professional reputation by presenting my frameworks as collaborative efforts she never contributed to. Vanessa was staring at her hands, apparently processing the realization that her entire professional identity at Meridian had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of her own contributions. "What happens now?" Marcus asked Catherine, though his voice carried the tone of someone who already suspected the answer wouldn't be favorable. "The board has voted unanimously to restructure strategic operations to address these attribution issues," Catherine replied. "We're establishing a strategic innovation division to ensure proper recognition and compensation for actual strategic contributions." "And who will be heading this new division?" Vanessa asked, though she was looking at me with the dawning understanding of someone who just realized they'd been patronizing their future supervisor. "Olivia has been appointed Director of Strategic Innovation, effective immediately," Catherine announced. "She'll be reporting directly to me with complete autonomy over strategic methodology and a team of 6 analysts." The room went completely silent. Marcus and Vanessa sat frozen, processing the information that the woman they dismissed as a supportive spouse and helpful domestic manager was now going to be one of the most senior strategic voices at Meridian Technologies. "There are also some organizational changes that affect both of your positions," Catherine continued. "Marcus, you're being reassigned to regional account management. Vanessa, you'll be transferring to the Strategic Innovation Division as a junior analyst, reporting to Olivia's team lead." The woman who'd called me just the wife at Saturday's charity auction was going to be working under my authority by Wednesday morning. The man who'd spent 8 years building his career on my intellectual labor was going to be answering to colleagues who now understood exactly whose expertise had been driving his success. "I start tomorrow morning," I said, speaking directly to Marcus and Vanessa for the first time since entering Catherine's office. "I look forward to working with both of you in your new capacities." For 8 years, I'd been the invisible architect of their professional success. Now, they were going to learn what it felt like to work for the person whose intelligence they'd been borrowing without permission. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that makes everything feel inevitable. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror at 6:30 a.m., adjusting the charcoal blazer I'd purchased specifically for this moment, the first day of my professional life in 8 years where my name would appear on my own work. Marcus had left the house an hour earlier without saying goodbye, his face gray with the realization that his wife had just become one of the most senior strategic voices at his company. The man who'd spent 8 years dismissing my contributions as domestic support was now going to spend his days explaining to regional clients why his strategic insights had suddenly become less sophisticated. "I start tomorrow morning," I said, speaking directly to Marcus and Vanessa for the first time since entering Catherine's office. "I look forward to working with both of you in your new capacities." For 8 years, I'd been the invisible architect of their professional success. Now, they were going to learn what it felt like to work for the person whose intelligence they'd been borrowing without permission. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that makes everything feel inevitable. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror at 6:30 a.m., adjusting the charcoal blazer I'd purchased specifically for this moment, the first day of my professional life in 8 years where my name would appear on my own work. Marcus had left the house an hour earlier without saying goodbye, his face gray with the realization that his wife had just become one of the most senior strategic voices at his company. The man who'd spent 8 years dismissing my contributions as domestic support was now going to spend his days explaining to regional clients why his strategic insights had suddenly become less sophisticated. At 8:15 a.m., I walked into the Meridian Technologies building as Director of Strategic Innovation, carrying the leather briefcase Catherine had sent over the previous evening. The security guard who'd politely nodded at me during holiday parties now smiled with the recognition reserved for executives. "Good morning, Miss Chen. 32nd floor, elevator bank B." Miss Chen, not Mrs. Marcus Chen. not Marcus's wife, not the woman who organized company social events. For the first time in 8 years, I had a professional identity that existed independently of my marriage. The Strategic Innovation Division occupied the entire north wing of the 32nd floor, corner offices with floor-to-ceiling windows, a conference room that could seat 20, and workspace for the team of 6 analysts Catherine had promised. My office was at the end of the hallway, with my name already etched on the glass door. Olivia Chen, Director. At 9 a.m. sharp, my assistant Jennifer knocked and entered carrying a tablet and coffee. Miss Chen, your team is ready for the introductory meeting. Also, Vanessa Sterling has been asking about her reporting structure and start date. Vanessa Sterling, the woman who'd spent Sunday afternoon in my home office explaining how she and Marcus had developed strategic frameworks I'd created alone. The accomplished professional who'd patronizingly suggested I consider part-time consulting work while building her career on my intellectual labor. Schedule Vanessa for 10:30. I want to meet with the existing team first. The Strategic Innovation team consisted of 5 analysts who'd been transferred from various departments, plus David Kim, a senior analyst who would serve as team lead. Each had been selected based on their demonstrated ability to conduct sophisticated research and develop original strategic insights, capabilities that had been systematically undervalued in their previous positions. Good morning, everyone, I said, settling at the head of the conference table. I'm excited to work with a team that understands the difference between presenting ideas and creating them. The comment drew knowing smiles from several team members. These were professionals who'd watched their insights be filtered through senior colleagues, repackaged as collaborative efforts, and presented by people who'd contributed nothing beyond scheduling and logistics. Our first priority is establishing new protocols for strategic development and attribution, I continued. Every analysis, every framework, every recommendation will be properly credited to its actual author. No more ghostwriting, no more collaborative misattribution, no more invisible contributions. What about existing projects? Asked Sarah Martinez, a brilliant analyst whose cultural assessment expertise had been consistently overlooked by her previous supervisor. We're conducting a comprehensive review of all strategic initiatives from the past 3 years. Attribution will be corrected, credit will be properly assigned, and compensation adjustments will be made where appropriate. At exactly 10:30, Jennifer escorted Vanessa Sterling into my office. She wore her professional armor, tailored black suit, designer handbag, confidence that had carried her through 3 years of career advancement based on my uncredited work. But something in her posture suggested uncertainty, as if she was finally questioning the foundation of her professional identity. Good morning, Vanessa. Please have a seat. She settled across from my desk with the careful composure of someone navigating unfamiliar territory. For 3 years, our interactions had followed a predictable pattern. I provided domestic hospitality while she occupied professional space alongside Marcus. Now she was sitting in my office waiting for direction from the woman she'd dismissed as just the wife. I imagine this transition is surprising, I began. Surprising is one way to put it, she replied carefully. I'm still processing the information about attribution and collaborative development. What specifically are you processing? Vanessa was quiet for a long moment, apparently considering how to articulate thoughts that challenged everything she'd believed about her professional contributions. I genuinely thought Marcus and I were developing those strategic frameworks together, she said finally. The meetings, the discussions, the planning sessions, I felt like I was contributing to the analytical process. You were contributing to the presentation process, I clarified. Marcus would share my research with you, you would help organize it into presentable formats, and together you would coordinate the logistics of board presentations. That's valuable work, but it's not the same as developing strategic content. But the cultural assessments, the employee interviews, I thought those were collaborative efforts. Those were conversations I conducted alone while you were managing Marcus's calendar and travel arrangements. When Marcus told you about insights from employee interviews, he was sharing information I'd gathered through my own research. I watched her process this information, her professional self-image shifting as she realized that her role in Marcus's success had been administrative rather than analytical. So what happens now? She asked. Now you learn to develop original strategic content instead of presenting someone else's work as collaborative achievement, I replied. You're intelligent, capable, and hardworking. Those are excellent foundations for actual strategic analysis. But I'll be reporting to your team lead as a junior analyst. Yes, because despite 3 years in strategic support roles, you haven't actually developed independent analytical capabilities. You've been managing the presentation of my strategic insights without understanding the research methodologies that created them. That seems like a significant step backward career-wise. It's not backward, Vanessa, it's honest. For the first time in 3 years, you'll be evaluated based on your actual contributions, rather than your ability to present my work as collaborative effort. She was quiet again, apparently processing the reality that her professional advancement at Meridian would now depend on capabilities she'd never actually developed. David Kim will be your direct supervisor, I continued. He'll provide guidance on research methodologies, analytical frameworks, and strategic development processes. Consider this an opportunity to build the expertise you've been credited with, but haven't actually possessed. What about my relationship with Marcus? We've been working closely for 3 years. Marcus has been reassigned to regional account management. His strategic development responsibilities have been transferred to this division. There won't be ongoing collaboration between you. The implications were clear. The professional partnership she'd built with Marcus, the collaborative relationship that had defined her career trajectory, no longer existed. She would be starting over as a junior analyst, learning skills she should have developed years earlier, instead of taking credit for mine. I want to be direct with you, Vanessa, I said, leaning forward. You called me just the wife who keeps his schedule straight and his coffee hot at Saturday's charity auction. You suggested I consider part-time consulting work because clients expect demonstrated experience and proven track records. You patronized me while building your career on strategic insights I'd developed without recognition or compensation. She looked down at her hands, apparently remembering her confident dismissal of my professional capabilities while unknowingly appropriating my intellectual contributions. I didn't know, she said quietly. No, you didn't know, but you also didn't question why Marcus's strategic insights were so sophisticated when his independent analytical work was consistently surface level. You didn't wonder why his most successful presentations coincided with periods when he was traveling while someone else was conducting intensive research at home. What do you want from me? I want you to develop actual strategic capabilities instead of presenting other people's work as your own achievement. I want you to understand the difference between coordinating presentations and creating analytical content. Most importantly, I want you to succeed based on your own contributions, rather than systematic misattribution of mine. Vanessa nodded slowly, apparently understanding that her professional future would now depend on abilities she'd never actually cultivated. Your first assignment is a competitive analysis of European manufacturing companies suitable for acquisition. David will provide guidance on research methodologies and analytical frameworks. The analysis is due in 2 weeks, and it will be evaluated based on originality, depth, and strategic insight. And if I don't meet those standards? Then you'll learn why strategic development requires expertise that can't be borrowed from other people. After she left, I sat in my office reviewing organizational charts that now showed my name at the top of strategic operations. The woman who'd spent years whispering insights to people who spoke them loudly was finally speaking for herself, and the people who'd built their careers on my invisible contributions were about to discover what professional life looked like when they could only take credit for work they'd actually done. By Thursday afternoon, word of the Strategic Innovation Division restructuring had spread throughout Meridian Technologies like wildfire through dry grass. I'd received 17 meeting requests from department heads wanting to discuss collaborative opportunities, 12 emails from colleagues congratulating me on my appointment, and 3 phone calls from headhunters who'd somehow learned that the woman behind Marcus Chen's strategic success was now available for independent consultation. The most telling response came from Margaret Chen in accounting, the same woman who'd giggled behind her wine glass at Saturday's charity auction when Vanessa dismissed me as Marcus's domestic support system. "Olivia," she said, appearing in my office doorway with a coffee cup and an expression of carefully managed embarrassment. "I wanted to congratulate you on your appointment. The Strategic Innovation Division is exactly what Meridian needs." "Thank you, Margaret." I have to admit, I'm impressed by the Patterson Industries analysis. The cultural integration protocols were remarkably sophisticated, much more advanced than the strategic work we usually see. Much more advanced than the strategic work attributed to Marcus and Vanessa, she meant. Margaret had been reviewing their collaborative submissions for 3 years without realizing that the most sophisticated content was ghostwritten by the woman she'd dismissed as a helpful housewife. "I'm glad the analysis was useful," I replied. "The board is particularly excited about the European expansion opportunities you identified. Catherine mentioned that you've been conducting strategic research independently for several years." Several years? 8 years of invisible intellectual labor disguised as marital support and domestic organization. "I've been maintaining my analytical skills," I said diplomatically. Margaret nodded with the understanding of someone who was finally connecting dots that had been visible but unexamined for years. "Well, the entire accounting department is excited to work with someone who understands the difference between strategic development and presentation logistics." After she left, I reviewed the European manufacturing analysis that Vanessa had submitted that morning, her first independent strategic assessment in 3 years of supposed collaborative development with Marcus. The document was 12 pages of generic observations, surface-level competitive analysis, and recommendations that could have been copied from any business textbook. David Kim knocked on my door at 3:15, carrying Vanessa's submission and wearing the expression of someone trying to deliver disappointing news diplomatically. "How did she do?" I asked. "She clearly put effort into the research," David said carefully. "The document is well formatted and professionally presented." But there's no original analytical insight. The competitive analysis reads like a compilation of company websites and annual reports. The strategic recommendations are generic enough to apply to any manufacturing acquisition. There's no evidence of independent strategic thinking. I wasn't surprised. Vanessa had spent 3 years presenting my strategic frameworks as collaborative achievements without understanding the research methodologies that created them. She'd managed the logistics of strategic presentations while remaining unaware of the intellectual processes that generated strategic content. "What's your assessment?" I asked. "She needs fundamental training in research methodology, analytical framework development, and strategic thinking. The work she submitted wouldn't meet standards for a first-year business school assignment." Recommendations: 6 months of intensive mentoring with graduated skill-building exercises. Start with basic competitive analysis, advance to market assessment, eventually develop capacity for original strategic framework creation. 6 months to learn capabilities she should have developed over 3 years, instead of taking credit for my work. David's assessment was generous. Most professionals would need longer to develop genuine strategic expertise after years of intellectual dependence. At 4:30, Catherine stopped by for our weekly check-in meeting, settling into one of my conference chairs with the satisfaction of someone whose strategic gamble was paying dividends. "How was your first week?" she asked. "Illuminating. The team is excited about developing original strategic content with proper attribution. Vanessa is struggling with independent analytical work. Marcus has been avoiding contact entirely." That's not surprising. His regional account management supervisor mentioned that his client presentations have become notably less sophisticated since the restructuring. Marcus's strategic insights had suddenly become surface level because he no longer had access to my research and analytical frameworks. His clients were noticing the difference between presentations built on my intellectual foundation versus his independent capabilities. "What about industry response?" I asked. "Exceptional. The Patterson Industries acquisition is moving forward based on your cultural integration strategy. 3 other manufacturing companies have approached us about potential partnerships after hearing about our innovative approach to cross-sector analysis." My innovative approach. For the first time in 8 years, strategic insights I developed were being attributed correctly and generating recognition for the person who'd actually created them. There's something else, Catherine continued. The National Strategic Planning Association wants to interview you for their quarterly publication. They're featuring innovative approaches to cultural integration in corporate acquisitions. Based on the Patterson analysis? Based on your overall strategic methodology. The sophistication of your analytical frameworks has attracted attention throughout the industry. People are asking who this Olivia Chen is and where she's been hiding. Where I'd been hiding. In a converted guest bedroom in Lincoln Park, developing strategic frameworks that built other people's careers while erasing my professional identity. I'd like you to consider the interview, Catherine said. The exposure would benefit both you and Meridian. Strategic planning professionals need to see what original analytical thinking looks like when it's properly attributed. That evening, I arrived home to find Marcus sitting at our kitchen table with a glass of wine and an expression I'd never seen before, something that mixed hurt, confusion, and grudging respect in equal proportions. "How was your first week as a corporate executive?" he asked, his tone carrying layers of meaning I was still learning to decode. "Productive. How was your first week in regional account management?" "Illuminating," he said, echoing my earlier conversation with Catherine. Clients are asking different questions about strategic direction, more detailed questions about analytical methodology and competitive assessment. Questions he couldn't answer because he'd never understood the research processes that generated the strategic insights he'd been presenting for years. "I imagine that's challenging," I said. "It's humbling." Marcus took another sip of wine. "I spent 8 years thinking I was good at strategic development. Turns out I was good at presenting your strategic development." It was the closest thing to acknowledgement he'd ever given me. Not an apology exactly, but recognition that his professional success had been built on my uncredited intellectual contributions. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you learn to develop original strategic content instead of presenting mine as your own work," I replied, using almost the same words I'd said to Vanessa. "You're intelligent and hardworking. Those are good foundations for actual strategic development. Will you help me?" The question hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we wanted to cross. Marcus was asking for professional guidance from the woman he'd spent 8 years treating as his unpaid intellectual resource. "I'll help you the same way I'd help any colleague who wanted to develop strategic capabilities," I said carefully, "but I won't be your ghostwriter anymore. If you want strategic insights, you'll need to develop them yourself or hire them at market rates." Marcus nodded slowly, apparently understanding that the professional dynamic that had defined our marriage no longer existed. The woman who'd whispered strategic insights to him for 8 years was finally speaking for herself, and he was going to have to learn to speak his own ideas. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "I should have said that years ago." It wasn't an apology for 8 years of intellectual theft or recognition for systematic exploitation of my expertise, but it was acknowledgement that I'd finally stopped being invisible, and for the moment, that felt like enough. The woman who'd been dismissed as just the wife was now the most respected strategic voice at Meridian Technologies, and the people who'd built their careers on my hidden contributions were learning what professional life looked like when they could only claim credit for work they'd actually done. For the first time in 8 years, I was exactly where I belonged, in the light, speaking my own insights with my name on my own work. 3 weeks into my role as Director of Strategic Innovation, I received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Alana Rodriguez from Northwestern's Business School knocked on my office door at 2:30 on a Tuesday afternoon, carrying a leather portfolio and the focused energy of someone on an important mission. "Olivia, I hope you don't mind the unannounced visit. I've been following the industry coverage of your Patterson analysis, and I wanted to discuss something with you." Elena had been one of my favorite professors during my MBA program, sharp, demanding, and completely intolerant of intellectual mediocrity. She'd pushed me to develop analytical frameworks that went beyond surface-level business school thinking, encouraging the kind of strategic depth that I'd been applying invisibly for years. Of course, please sit. What brings you here? I'm developing a case study for our strategic management curriculum about intellectual attribution in corporate environments. The Meridian restructuring situation is exactly the kind of real-world example our students need to understand. She opened her portfolio, revealing documents that looked remarkably similar to the metadata analysis Catherine had shown me weeks earlier. How did you get access to that information? I asked. Catherine Morrison sits on our advisory board. She shared your story with our faculty committee as an example of systematic intellectual property misattribution in corporate settings. The case study would examine how talented professionals can become invisible contributors to other people's careers. And you want to use my situation? With your permission and full anonymization, yes. This pattern is much more common than most people realize, especially among women in strategic roles. Your situation provides a perfect framework for teaching students how to recognize and prevent intellectual exploitation. I thought about Vanessa, still struggling with basic competitive analysis after 3 years of presenting my strategic frameworks as collaborative achievements. About Marcus, now facing clients who expected sophisticated insights he'd never learned to develop independently. About the dozens of other women who might be ghostwriting other people's success stories right now. What would the case study cover? Attribution tracking methodologies, intellectual property documentation, collaborative versus exploitative professional relationships, and organizational structures that prevent systematic misattribution. Your metadata evidence provides an excellent example of how sophisticated analysis can be identified and properly credited. Alina leaned forward with the intensity she'd brought to graduate seminars 15 years earlier. But more importantly, I want to develop a mentorship program for women who might be in similar situations, women whose strategic capabilities are being systematically undervalued or appropriated by colleagues who take credit for their intellectual contributions. A mentorship program. The concept sent electricity through my chest, similar to what I'd felt when Catherine first offered me the strategic innovation position. What would that involve? Identifying talented women throughout Chicago's corporate community who might be contributing strategic insight without receiving proper recognition. Providing guidance on documentation, attribution, and professional development. Most importantly, helping them transition from invisible contributors to recognized strategic leaders. I thought about Sarah Martinez, now thriving in the Strategic Innovation Division after years of having her cultural assessment expertise overlooked. About the dozens of other brilliant minds who might be hiding behind administrative titles or overshadowed by male colleagues taking credit for their work. I'm interested. When would this program launch? Next semester, if we can identify the right leadership. The position would be Adjunct Professor of Strategic Attribution, with responsibility for curriculum development and program coordination. 15 hours per week, which would complement your current executive responsibilities. Adjunct Professor, teaching graduate students about intellectual attribution while mentoring professional women who might be experiencing the same systematic invisibility I'd endured for 8 years. The compensation is modest, Alina continued, but the impact could be significant. We're talking about preventing intellectual exploitation before it becomes entrenched, rather than addressing it after years of systematic misattribution. I'd need to discuss this with Catherine to ensure it doesn't conflict with my responsibilities here. Already done. Catherine thinks the program would benefit Meridian by improving industry standards for strategic attribution. She's agreed to serve as a guest lecturer on organizational restructuring approaches. That evening, I called my sister Jennifer in San Francisco, the only person who'd consistently questioned why Marcus's strategic insights were so much more sophisticated than his independent analytical work. "You're considering teaching?" she asked, after I explained Alina's proposal. Teaching and mentoring, helping other women avoid the intellectual exploitation I experienced for 8 years. That sounds perfect for you. You've always been good at explaining complex concepts, and you certainly understand the attribution problem from personal experience. Jennifer paused, apparently considering something she wasn't sure how to articulate.
Can I ask you something? Do you think Marcus knew what he was doing? The systematic appropriation of your work, I mean. The question had been haunting me for weeks.
Marcus's recent acknowledgement suggested he'd finally recognized the intellectual foundation of his career, but whether he'd been consciously exploiting my contributions or genuinely unaware remained unclear. I think he knew I was helping him, I said carefully, but I don't think he understood the scope of my contributions. He saw my research as support rather than strategy. To him, the difference between providing assistance and creating intellectual content wasn't significant. And Vanessa? Vanessa genuinely believed she was collaborating with Marcus on strategic development. She had no idea that her role was administrative rather than analytical. In some ways, she was as much a victim of the system as I was. But she still dismissed you publicly and appropriated your work. Yes, but she did it unknowingly, which makes her situation different from Marcus's. She was participating in intellectual theft without understanding that's what she was doing. Are you going to help her develop actual strategic capabilities? Through David Kim's mentoring program, yes, not because I forgive the dismissiveness, but because she deserves the opportunity to build genuine expertise instead of continuing to rely on other people's intellectual contributions. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. You're more generous than I would be. It's not generosity. It's understanding that systematic intellectual exploitation is larger than individual personalities. Marcus and Vanessa were participating in patterns that exist throughout corporate America. Changing those patterns requires addressing the systems, not just punishing the individuals. So you'll take the teaching position? Yes. Elena's program could prevent other women from experiencing 8 years of systematic invisibility. That's worth 15 hours per week of curriculum development. The following morning, I met with Catherine to formalize my participation in Northwestern's Strategic Attribution Program. The board is enthusiastic about your academic involvement, she said. Industry leadership in intellectual property standards could differentiate Meridian from competitors who still rely on informal attribution practices. What about internal applications? We're implementing your attribution tracking methodologies company-wide next quarter. Every strategic contribution will be documented, credited, and compensated appropriately. No more ghostwriting, no more collaborative misattribution. I looked out Catherine's office windows at Chicago's financial district, thinking about all the brilliant minds working in those buildings who might be contributing strategic insights without recognition. Women whose analytical capabilities were being systematically undervalued while other people built careers on their intellectual contributions. There's something else, Catherine continued. Harvard Business Review wants to publish a case study about organizational restructuring for intellectual attribution. They're particularly interested in the methodology we used to identify and correct systematic misattribution. Harvard Business Review, the same publication whose case studies I'd analyzed while developing integration strategies for Marcus's presentations. Now they wanted to study my approach to intellectual attribution as a model for other organizations. When would they need the case study? 6 months. Enough time for you to document our entire restructuring process and develop recommendations for other companies facing similar attribution challenges. The woman who'd spent years developing strategic frameworks in secret was about to become a published authority on intellectual attribution. The invisible contributor was finally speaking loud enough for the entire business community to hear. I accept, I said, both the Harvard Business Review case study and Elena's teaching position. Catherine smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose strategic investment was generating returns beyond initial projections. Excellent! Your first lecture is next Tuesday. The topic is Recognizing Intellectual Exploitation in Professional Settings. I suspect you'll have plenty of material to cover. For the first time in my professional life, my expertise was being sought, recognized, and properly attributed. The woman who'd whispered strategic insights for 8 years was finally speaking for herself, and people throughout the business world were listening. 6 months after my appointment as Director of Strategic Innovation, I stood at the podium of Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management, looking out at an auditorium filled with MBA students, corporate executives, and academic researchers gathered for the Strategic Attribution Summit. The woman who'd spent years developing frameworks in secret was about to address an audience of 300 professionals about intellectual property rights in corporate settings. How many of you have had your ideas presented by someone else? I began, echoing the question that had launched my first conference presentation months earlier. Nearly every hand in the auditorium rose. The shared recognition of intellectual appropriation rippled through the audience like an electric current. For 8 years, I was the ghost author of someone else's professional success story, I continued. I researched, analyzed, and strategized in silence while colleagues took credit for my intellectual contributions. My situation isn't unique, it's systematic. From the podium, I could see Elena Rodrigues in the front row, taking notes beside Catherine Morrison and several other executives who'd implemented attribution tracking programs based on Meridian's model. In the third row, a woman I didn't recognize was recording my presentation on her phone, probably planning to share insights with colleagues facing similar challenges. The most insidious aspect wasn't the lack of recognition, I said, clicking to my first slide showing statistical data about intellectual misattribution in corporate environments. It was how I convinced myself this was normal, that supporting someone else's career advancement was equivalent to building my own professional identity. The slide displayed research I'd conducted over the past 6 months, surveying women in strategic roles across 12 major corporations. The results were staggering. 67% reported contributing intellectual content that was presented by male colleagues without attribution. 41% had developed strategic frameworks that were credited to collaborative efforts they'd never actually participated in. Systematic intellectual exploitation affects entire industries. When talented professionals become invisible contributors, organizations lose access to diverse strategic thinking. Innovation suffers when the most sophisticated analytical minds are systematically excluded from recognition and advancement. I shared specific case studies from companies that had implemented attribution tracking methodologies, revenue increases, strategic sophistication improvements, and employee satisfaction metrics that demonstrated measurable benefits of proper intellectual property recognition. The solution isn't complicated, but it requires institutional commitment, I said, advancing to recommendations that Catherine and I had developed based on Meridian's restructuring experience. Documentation systems, metadata tracking, individual attribution requirements, and organizational cultures that reward actual contributors rather than effective presenters. During the question period, a woman from the audience stood to share her own experience with intellectual appropriation in the pharmaceutical industry. Another described systematic misattribution in management consulting. A third explained how she'd been documenting her contributions for 2 years while watching male colleagues receive credit for her strategic insights. After my presentation, I was approached by Dr. Patricia Williams from Harvard Business School, the same woman who'd been intrigued by the Patterson Industries analysis during that first board presentation months earlier. Olivia, your Harvard Business Review case study has generated significant academic interest, she said. We're launching a research initiative on intellectual attribution patterns across industries. Would you consider serving as principal investigator? Principal investigator? Leading academic research into the systematic patterns I'd experienced personally for 8 years. What would that involve? Comprehensive analysis of attribution practices across Fortune 500 companies, development of standardized tracking methodologies, and publication of findings that could influence industry standards for intellectual property recognition. The research would expand beyond individual cases to examine systematic patterns affecting thousands of professionals whose contributions remained invisible while others advanced careers built on their expertise. The position would be visiting scholar at Harvard Business School, with research support and academic resources. The goal is establishing intellectual attribution as a recognized field of organizational psychology. Visiting scholar at Harvard. The woman who'd been dismissed as just the wife was being invited to conduct research that could prevent intellectual exploitation throughout corporate America. I'm very interested, I said. When would the research begin? Next academic year. The initial phase involves developing survey methodologies and recruiting corporate partners willing to implement tracking systems. Meridian's restructuring provides an excellent model for other organizations. That evening, I returned home to find Marcus waiting in our living room with Chinese takeout and an expression that mixed nervousness with something approaching pride. "How did the summit go?" he asked, serving lo mein onto plates I'd chosen years earlier when I'd still believed domestic decisions were my primary contribution to our partnership. "Better than I expected. Harvard wants me to lead research into systematic intellectual attribution patterns across industries." Marcus nodded slowly, processing information that positioned his wife as a nationally recognized authority on the intellectual exploitation he'd unknowingly perpetrated for years. "That's incredible," he said, and I could hear genuine admiration in his voice. "You're becoming exactly the professional leader you always should have been." "What about you? How are the regional accounts developing?" "Slowly but honestly," he replied. "I'm learning to conduct actual competitive analysis instead of presenting your strategic frameworks as my own insights. It's humbling, but it's authentic." Marcus had spent the past 6 months developing independent analytical capabilities under David Kim's mentoring program. His client presentations were less sophisticated than they'd been when built on my research, but they represented genuine strategic thinking rather than borrowed expertise. "There's something I want to tell you," he continued. "I've been attending therapy to understand how I convinced myself that appropriating your intellectual work was acceptable spousal support." Therapy? Marcus was seeking professional guidance to examine the systematic exploitation he'd rationalized as marital partnership. "What have you learned?" "That I was threatened by your analytical capabilities and unconsciously diminished them to protect my professional identity. Taking credit for your work made me feel competent while keeping you dependent on me for professional validation." It was the most honest acknowledgement he'd ever given me about the psychological dynamics underlying 8 years of intellectual appropriation. "I'm proud of you for seeking that understanding," I said. "Are you proud enough to consider staying married to me while you become a Harvard researcher?" The question hung between us like a bridge we both had to decide whether to cross. Marcus was asking whether our marriage could survive the complete reversal of our professional dynamic, the intellectual subordinate becoming the recognized expert while he learned to develop independent capabilities. "I'm proud enough to try," I said carefully, "but our relationship has to be based on mutual respect rather than my invisible contributions to your career advancement." "I understand, and I want you to know that watching you reclaim your professional identity has been the most inspiring thing I've ever witnessed, even though it required destroying the career I'd built on your uncredited work." 3 weeks later, I received a call from Jennifer Walsh, my former assistant who'd moved to Seattle to start her own strategic consulting firm. "Olivia, I have a favor to ask. I'm working with a tech company whose female engineers keep having their innovations credited to male colleagues. The CEO wants to implement attribution tracking based on your Meridian model. Send me their information. I'll schedule a consultation call." "There's something else. I've had 12 other companies ask about systematic attribution analysis over the past month. All of them mentioned your Harvard Business Review article." 12 companies implementing intellectual property tracking because of frameworks I'd developed while transforming my own systematic invisibility into recognized expertise. "I think you might want to consider launching a consulting practice focused specifically on intellectual attribution solutions," Jennifer continued. "The demand is significant, and you're becoming the recognized authority in this area." A consulting practice, building a business around preventing the intellectual exploitation I'd experienced while helping other talented professionals reclaim recognition for their contributions. "Let me finish the Harvard research first," I said. "But yes, I'm interested in developing attribution solutions as a specialized practice." "Perfect. I'll start maintaining a waiting list of potential clients." That night, I sat in what had once been my secret research space, the converted guest bedroom where I'd built other people's careers while erasing my own professional identity. The room now served as my home office for Harvard research and Northwestern teaching preparation, with my diplomas on the walls and my publications prominently displayed. The woman who'd spent 8 years whispering strategic insights to people who spoke them loudly was finally speaking for herself. And the business world was listening, learning, and implementing changes that would prevent other talented professionals from disappearing into the shadows of someone else's success. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just using my voice, I was teaching others to find theirs too.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.